Hello, everybody. This is Psychology of the Unconscious by Carl Jung. Part 2, Chapter 3, The Transformation of the Libido, Part 2. Let us return for a moment to the infantile symptom of boring. Let's imagine a strong adult man carrying on the boring with 2 pieces of wood with the same perseverance and the energy corresponding to that of this child. He may very easily create fire by this play, but of greatest significance in this work is the rhythm. This hypothesis seems to me psychologically possible, although it should not be said that this is the only in this way could the discovery of fire occur. It can also result just as well by striking together of flints. It's scarcely possible that fire was created in only one way. All I want to establish here is merely the psychologic process, the symbolic indications of which point to the possibility that in such a way was fire invented or prepared. The existence of the primitive coitus play or rite seems to me sufficiently proven. The only thing that's obscure is the energy and emphasis of the ritual play. It's well known that those primitive rites were often of very bloody seriousness, and were performed with an extraordinary display of energy, which appears as a great contrast to the well-known indolence of primitive humanity. Therefore, the ritual activity entirely loses the character of play, and wins that of purposeful effort. If certain races can dance the whole night long to 3 tones in the most monotonous manner, then according to our idea, there is in this an absolute lack of the character of play pastime. It approaches nearer to exercise. There seems to exist a sort of compulsion to transfer the libido into such ritual activity. If the basis of the ritual activity is the sexual act, we may assume that it is really the underlying thought and object of the exercise. Under these circumstances, the question arises why the primitive man endeavors to represent the sexual act symbolically and with effort, or, if this wording appears to be too hypothetical, why does he exert energy to such a degree only to accomplish practically useless things which apparently don't especially amuse him? It may be assumed that the sexual act is more desirable to primitive man than such absurd and moreover fatiguing exercises. It's hardly possible but that a certain compulsion conducts the energy away from the original object and real purpose, inducing the production of surrogates. The existence of a phallic or orgiastic cult does not indicate eo ipso a particularly lascivious life, or any more than the ascetic symbolism of Christianity means an especially moral life. One honors that which one does not possess, or that which one is not. This compulsion, to speak in the nomenclature formulated above, removes a certain amount of libido from the real sexual activity, and creates a symbolic and practically valid substitute for what is lost. This psychology is confirmed by the above-mentioned Vachshandi ceremony. During the entire ceremony, none of the men may look at a woman. This detail again informs us that from whence the libido is to be diverted, but this gives rise to the pressing question, whence comes this compulsion? We've already suggested above that the primitive sexuality encounters a resistance, which leads to a sidetracking of the libido on a substitution actions. It's unthinkable that it is a question of any other opposition whatsoever, or of real obstacle, since it occurs to no savage to catch his elusive quarry with ritual charms. But it's a question of an internal resistance. Will opposes will, libido opposes libido. Since the psychologic resistance is an energetic phenomenon, corresponds to a certain amount of libido. The psychologic compulsion for the transformation of the libido is based on an original division of the will. I'll return to this primal splitting of the libido in another place. Here, let us concern ourselves only with the problem of the transition of the libido. The transition takes place, has been repeatedly suggested by means of shifting to an analogy. The libido is taken away from its proper place and transferred to another substratum. The resistance against sexuality aims, therefore, at preventing the sexual act. It also seeks to crowd the libido away from the sexual function. We see, for example, in hysteria, how the specific repression blocks the real path of transference. Therefore, the libido is obliged to take another path, and that an earlier one, namely the incestuous road which ultimately leads to the parents. Let us speak, however, of the incest prohibition, which hindered the very first sexual transference. Then the situation changes insofar that no earlier way of transference is left, except that of the pre-sexual stage of development, where the libido was still partly in the function of nutrition. By the regression of the pre-sexual material, the libido becomes quasi-desexualized. But as the incest prohibition signifies only a temporary and conditional restriction of sexuality, thus only the part of the libido which is best designated as the incestuous component is now pushed back to the pre-sexual stage. The repression, therefore, concerns only that part of the sexual libido which wishes to fix itself permanently upon the parents. The sexual libido is only withdrawn from the incestuous component, repressed upon the pre-sexual stage, and there, if the operation is successful, desexualized, by which this amount of libido is prepared for an asexual application. However, it is to be assumed that this operation is accomplished only with difficulty, because the incestuous libido, so to speak, must be artificially separated from the sexual libido, with which for ages through the whole animal kingdom it was indistinguishably united. The regression of the incestuous component must therefore take place not only with great difficulty, but also carry with it into a pre-sexual stage a considerable sexual character. The consequence of this is that the resulting phenomena, although stamped with the character of the sexual act, are nevertheless not really sexual acts de facto. They're derived from the pre-sexual stage and are maintained by the repressed sexual libido, therefore possess a double significance. Thus the fire-boring is a coitus, and to be sure an incestuous one, but a desexualized one, which has lost its immediate sexual worth and is therefore indirectly useful to the propagation of the species. The pre-sexual stage is characterized by countless possibilities of application, because the libido has not yet formed definite localizations. It therefore appears intelligible that an amount of libido which reaches this stage through regression is confronted with manifold possibilities of application. Above all, it's met with the possibility of a purely onanistic activity. But as the matter in question is the regressive component of libido is sexual libido, the ultimate object of which is propagation, therefore it goes to the external object, parents. It will also introvert with this destination as its essential character. The result, therefore, is that the purely onanistic activity turns out to be insufficient, and another object must be sought for, which takes the place of the incest object. The nurturing Mother Earth represents the ideal example of such an object. The psychology of the pre-sexual stage contributes the nutrition component, the sexual libido, the coitus idea. From this, the ancient symbols of agriculture arise. In the work of agriculture, hunger and incest intermingle. The ancient cults of Mother Earth and all the superstitions founded thereon saw in the cultivation of the earth the fertilization of the mother. The aim of the action is desexualized, however, for it is the fruit of the field and the nourishment contained therein. The regression resulting from the incest prohibition leads, in this case, to the new valuation of the mother, this time, however, not as a sexual object, but as a nourisher. The discovery of fire seems to be due to very similar regression in the pre-sexual stage, more particularly to the nearest stage of the displaced rhythmic manifestation, the libido, introverted from the incest prohibition, with the more detailed designation of the motor components of coitus, when it reaches the pre-sexual stage, meets the related infantile boring, to which it now gives, in accordance with its realistic destination, an actual material. Therefore, the material is fittingly called materia, as the object is the mother, as above. I sought to show above the action of the infantile boring requires only the strength and perseverance of an adult man and suitable material to generate fire. If this is so, it may be expected that, analogous to our foregoing case of onanistic boring, the generation of fire originally occurred as such an act of quasi-onanistic activity, objectively expressed. The demonstration of this can never be actually furnished, but it is thinkable and somewhere traces of this original onanistic preliminary exercise of fire production have been preserved. I have succeeded in finding a passage in a very old monument of Hindu literature which contains this transition of the sexual libido through the onanistic phase and the preparation of fire. The passage is found in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. In truth, he, Atman, was as large as a woman and a man when they embraced each other. This, his own self, he divided into two parts, out of which husband and wife were formed. With her he copulated. From this humanity sprang. She, however, pondered, how may he unite with me after he's created me from himself? Oh, now I shall hide. Then she became a cow. He, however, became a bull and mated with her. From that sprang the horned cattle. She became a mare. He became a stallion. She became a she-ass, he an ass, and mated with her. From these sprang the whole-hoofed animals. She became a goat, he became a buck. She became a ewe, he became a ram. He mated with her. Thus were created goats and sheep. Thus it happened that all mates, even down to the ants, he created, and then he perceived, truly I am myself am creation, for I have created the whole world. Thereupon he rubbed his hands, held before his mouth, so that he brought forth fire from his mouth, as from the mother's womb, and from his hands. We meet here a peculiar myth of creation which requires a psychologic interpretation. In the beginning, the libido was undifferentiated and bisexual. This was followed by differentiation into male and a female component. From then on, man knows what he is. Now follows a gap in the coherence of the thought where belongs that very resistance which we have postulated above for the explanation of the urge of sublimation. Next follows the onanistic act of rubbing and boring, here finger-sucking, transferred from the sexual zone, from which proceeds the production of fire. The libido here leaves its characteristic manifestation as sexual function and regresses to the pre-sexual stage, where in conformity with the above explanation, it occupies one of the preliminary stages of sexuality, thereby producing, in the view expressed in the Upanishads, the first human art, and from there, as suggested by Kuhn's idea of the root month, perhaps the higher intellectual activity in general. This course of development is not strange to the psychiatrist, for its well-known psychopathological fact that onanism and excessive activity of fantasy are very closely related. The sexualizing autonomizing of the mind through autoeroticism is so familiar a fact that examples of that are superfluous. The course of the libido, as we may conclude from these studies, originally proceeded in a similar manner as in a child, only in a reverse sequence. The sexual act was pushed out of its proper zone and was transferred into the analogous mouth zone, the mouth receiving the significance of the female genitals, the hand and the fingers respectively receiving the phallic meaning. In this manner, the regressively reoccupied activity of the pre-sexual stage is invested with the sexual significance, which indeed it already possessed in part before, but in a wholly different sense. Certain functions of the pre-sexual stage are found to be permanently suitable and therefore retained later on as sexual functions. Thus, for example, the mouth zones retained is of erotic importance, meaning that its valuation is permanently fixed. Concerning the mouth, we know that it is also a sexual meaning among animals, inasmuch, for example, stallions bite mares in the sexual act, also cats, cocks, etc. A second significance of the mouth is the instrument of speech. It serves essentially in the production of a mating call, which mostly represents the developed tones of the animal kingdom. As the hand, we know that its important significance of the contriction organ, for example among frogs. The frequent erotic use of the hands among monkeys is well known. If there exists a resistance against the real sexuality, then the accumulated libido is most likely to cause a hyperfunction of these collaterals, which are most adapted to compensate for the resistance, that is to say, the nearest function which serve for the introduction of the act. On one side of the function of the hand, on the other that of the mouth. The sexual act, however, against which the opposition is directed, is replaced by a similar act of the pre-sexual stage, the classic case being either finger-sucking or boring. Just as among apes, the foot can on occasion take the place of the hand, So the child is often uncertain in the choice of which object to suck, and puts the big toe in the mouth instead of the finger. This last movement belongs to a Hindu rite. Only the big toe was not put in the mouth, but held against the eye. Through the sexual significance of the hand and mouth, these organs, which in the pre-sexual stage serve to obtain pleasure, are invested with the procreating power, which is identical with the above-mentioned destination, which aims at the external object because it concerns the sexual or creating libido. When through the actual preparation of fire, the sexual character of the libido employed and that is fulfilled, when the mouth zone remains without adequate expression, only the hand has now reached its real, purely human goal in the first art. The mouth has, as we saw, a further important function, which is just as much sexual relation to the object as the hand, that is to say, the production of the mating call. In opening up the autoerotic ring, the hand-mouth, where the phallic hand becomes the fire-producing tool, the libido, which was directed to the mouth zone, was obliged to seek another path of functioning, which naturally was found in the already existing love call. The excessive libido entering here must have had the usual results, namely, the stimulation of the newly possessed function, hence an elaboration of the mating call. We know from the primitive sounds human speech is developed. Corresponding to the psychological situation, it might be assumed that language owes its real origin to this moment, when the impulse, repressed into the pre-sexual stage, turns to the external in order to find an equivalent object there. The real thought as a conscious activity is, as we saw in the first part of this book, a thinking with positive determination towards the external world, that is to say, a speech thinking. This sort of thinking seems to have originated at that moment. It's very remarkable that this view, which was won by the path of reasoning, is again supported by old tradition and other mythological fragments. In Aitareyopanishad, the following quotation is to be found in the doctrine of the development of man. Being brooded over, his mouth hatched out like as an egg. From out his mouth came speech, from speech the fire. In part 2, where it's depicted how the newly created objects entered man, it reads, fire, speech becoming, entered in the mouth. These quotations allow us to plainly recognize the intimate connection between fire and speech. In Brihadaranyaka Upanishad is to be found this passage. Yajnavalkya thus spoke, when after the death of his man his speech entereth the fire, his breath into the wind, his eye into the sun, etc. A further quotation from the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad reads, but when the sun is set, O Yajnavalkya, and the moon has set and the fire extinguished, what then serves man as light? Then speech serves him as light. Then by the light of speech he sits and moves, he carries on his work, and he returns home. But when the sun is set, O Yajnavalkya, and the moon is set, and the fire extinguished, and the voice is dumb, what then serves man as light? Then he serves himself, Atman, as light. Then by the light of himself he sits and moves, carries on his work, and returns home. In this passage we notice that fire again stands in the closest relation to speech. Speech itself is called a light, which in turn is reduced to the light of the Atman, the creating psychic force, the libido. Thus the Hindu metapsychology conceives speech and fire as emanations of the inner light from which we know that it is libido. Speech and fire are its forms of manifestation, the first human arts, which have resulted from its transformation. This common psychological origin seems also to be indicated by certain results of philology. The Indo-Germanic root ba designates the idea of to lighten, to shine. This root's found in the Greek, to shine or reveal. In Old Icelandic ban, white. In New High German bohnen, to make shining. The same root baha also designates to speak. It's found in Sanskrit ban, to speak, Armenian ban, word, in New High German ban, to banish. In Latin, fari, fanum. The root, belso, which also means to ring, to bark, is found in Sanskrit bas, to bark, and bas, to talk, to speak. Lithuanian balsas, voice, tone. Really, belso, to bring bright or luminous. Middle High German, blazo, pale. Lithuanian balti, to become white. The root la, with the meaning to make sound, to bark, is found in Sanskrit las, lasity, to resound, and losity, to radiate, to shine. The related root lasso, with the meaning desire, is also found in Sanskrit laste, to play, lash, lashity, to desire. New High German lust, Latin lascivious. The further related root lasso, to shine, to radiate, is found in losity, to radiate, to shine. This group unites, as is evident, the meaning of to desire, to play, to radiate, and to sound. A similar archaic confluence of meaning in the primal libido symbolism, as we are perhaps justified in calling it, is found in the class of Egyptian words, which are derived from the closely related roots bun and bel, and reduplication bun, bel. An original significance of these roots is to burst forth, to emerge, to extrude, to well out, and the associated idea of bubbling, boiling, and roundness. Bel, accompanied by the sign of the obelisk, is originally phallic nature, means source of light. The obelisk itself had, besides the name Tekenu and men, also the name Benben, or more rarely Berber and Belbel. The libido symbolism makes clear this connection, it seems to me. The Indo-Germanic root vel, with the meaning to wave or to undulate, fire, is found in Sanskrit alunka, burning. Gothic vulen, to undulate, Old High German and Middle High German valm, to heat or glow. The related Indo-Germanic root velko, with meaning of lighten, to glow, is found in Sanskrit ulko, firebrand. The same root vel means also to sound. In Sanskrit, vani, tone, song, music, shech, volity, to call. The root sveno, to sound, to ring, is found in Sanskrit svan, svanati, to rustle, to sound, zend, kanankt, Latin sonare, Old Iranian sim, Cambrian sign, Latin sonus, Anglo-Saxon sfinsian, to resound. The related root svenos, noise, sound, is found in Vedic svanas, noise, Latin sonar, sonorus. A further related root is phonos, tone, noise, an Old Iranian son, word. The root sve, locative, sveni, dative, sune, means sun. In Zend, kanga, sun. Compare above sveno, Zend, kananyit. Gothic sunna, sono. Here, goat has preceded us. The sun orb sings in emulation. Mid brothers' spheres his ancient round, his path predestined through creation. He ends with step of thunder sound. Faust, Part 1. Hearken, hark, the hours careering, sounding loud to spirit hearing. See the newborn day appearing, rocky portals jarring shatter, Phoebus wheels and rolling clatter. With a crash the light draws near, pealing rays and trumpet blazes. Eye is blinded, ear amazes. The unheard can no one hear. Slip within each blossom bell, deeper, deeper there to dwell, in the rocks beneath the leaf. If it strikes you, you are deaf. Faust, Part 2. We must also not forget the beautiful verse of Holdenderlin. Where art thou, drunken my soul dreams of all thy rapture? Yet even now I hearken as full of golden tones the radiant sun youth upon his heavenly lyre plays his even song to the echoing woods and hills. Just as in archaic speech, fire and speech, sounds, the mating call music, appear as forms of emanation of the libido, thus light and sound entering the psyche become one. Libido. Manilius expresses it in his beautiful verse. Why is it wonderful to understand the universe if men are able? That is, men in whose very being the universe exists, and of each one of whom is a representative of God in miniature. Or is it right to believe that men have sprung in any way except from heaven? He alone stands in the midst of the citadel, a conqueror, his head erect, his shining eyes fixed on the stars. The idea of the Sanskrit tejas suggests a fundamental significance of the libido for the conception of the world in general. I am indebted to Dr. Abegg in Zurich, a thorough Sanskrit scholar, for the compilation of the 8 meanings of this word. Tejas signifies sharpness, cutting edge, fire, splendor, light, glow, heat. 3. Healthy appearance or beauty. 4. The fiery and color-producing power of the human organism, thought to be in the bile. 5. Power, energy, vital force. 6. Passionate nature. 7. Mental, also magic strength, influence, position, and dignity. 8. The sperm. This gives us a dim idea of how, for primitive thought, the so-called objective world was and had to be a subjective image. To this thought must also be applied the words of the Chorus Mysticus. All that is perishable is only an allegory. This